What does it take to survive a slasher film? According to the 1996 meta-horror classic Scream, one can only live to see the credits if they, quote, never have sex. Why? Because sex equals death. And it's true. Even a cursory glance at the slasher genre's most famous films reveals a tight coupling of one kind of intimate encounter closely followed by a very different kind of intimate encounter. For example, Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, the list goes on. For most audiences, slasher films are a seemingly endless parade of masked men wielding sharp objects, hell-bent on destroying other people's sex lives. In the process, we lacerate, decapitate, immolate, and always somehow escape. We aren't stopped by bullets, explosions, falling from great heights, or even being chained to the bottom of a lake. Because for us, it's not about how many times you get stabbed in the eye with a coat hanger. It's about how many times you pull that coat hanger out and stab someone else with it. That's because we're supernaturally indestructible psychopaths, or S.N.I.P.s. You might be more familiar with some of our famous members, like Freddy, Jason, Michael, but there are thousands of S.N.I.P.s operating in field offices all over the country. We're proud of our work and our films. Unfortunately, the frequent pairing of hot sex and horrendous death has led many to misinterpret S.N.I.P.s as somehow embodying a negative judgment about sex itself. For example, renowned scholar Clover has written that, quote, killing those who seek or engage in unauthorized sex amounts to a generic imperative of the slasher film. In other words, a S.N.I.P.'s role is to punish people for pursuing pleasures deemed inappropriate. If you take just one thing from this talk, let it be this. S.N.I.P.s are okay with sex. Premarital, postmarital, as long as it's between consenting adults, it's fine. What we're not okay with is babies. What's wrong with babies, you ask? Is it because they poop all the time? Is it because they cry all the time? Is it because they remind us of our own lost innocence? No, it's really because babies pose a grave danger to us all. Because besides being loud, unsanitary, and depressing, babies are also disturbingly numerous. There are over 7 billion people on Earth, and according to the UN, we are on track to reach 11 billion by the end of the century. And human babies are a lot like beanie babies, in that the size of a personal collection quickly becomes embarrassing and ultimately deadly. Yes, deadly. Because despite our best efforts, people are living longer these days. And the spawn of their loins are living longer, which means that more people are contributing more to global warming for longer periods of time. Meanwhile, with every new customer born, fossil fuel companies tighten their stranglehold, watching with cold, dead eyes as the world flails about helplessly. What can we do? One study found that if a person living in the US were to go car-free, avoid flying, and eat vegan, they could prevent 5 tons of greenhouse gases from being emitted into the Earth's atmosphere every year. Not bad. But surely there's a way to act like a responsible adult that doesn't involve any actual effort or sacrifice, right? Yes, there is. Reducing your carbon legacy. A carbon legacy is like a multi-generational carbon footprint. Your total lifetime emissions combined with that of your descendants. The person with a small carbon legacy is far more beneficial to the planet than all the flightless vegans combined. In fact, the average American could save 120 tons of greenhouse gases from being emitted every year just by choosing to pop out one less kid. That said, there is a gaping wound separating carbon legacies across the globe. A mother in Bangladesh, for example, has a carbon legacy of approximately 136 metric tons. Her American equivalent, meanwhile, contributes about 18,500 metric tons. But the mother in Bangladesh is the one most likely to be stalked by global warming. Man-made climate change repeatedly stabs developing countries in the chest with a knife, the size of which is totally disproportionate to that of their actual emissions. So consider this. The US, about 4% of the world's population, produces greenhouse gases at a per capita rate 3 times that of the global average and 160 times that of the world's poorest nations. More than half of Americans now live in suburbs, neighborhoods notoriously dependent on cars for accessibility. Americans drive 3 trillion miles every year, often without realizing a S.N.I.P. is hiding in the back seat. Transportation now makes up more than a quarter of all US carbon emissions. Now consider this. A fifth of all US carbon emissions come from private residences, the average size of which has expanded greatly in recent years. That means more hiding places for S.N.I.P.s, but it also means that larger, wealthier homes require more energy to power and emit more greenhouse gases than smaller, lower-income homes. Additionally, as more forests are chopped down to build more suburban sprawl, there are less trees available to absorb the CO2 hemorrhaging from the planet, and less summer camps available for S.N.I.P.s to terrorize. To sum it up, affluent Americans are driving ever farther to reach ever larger homes that require ever more energy to power, consuming much of the world's resources in the process and releasing an obscene amount of greenhouse gases, which bring devastation to poor people all over the world. Meanwhile, those affluent Americans experience little to no consequence themselves. And then they have children who continue the murderous rampage of their parents in the sequel. Fortunately, S.N.I.P.s have a solution: killing sexually active straight people. Not just any sexually active straight people. We focus on straight, cisgendered, white sexually active people from well-to-do suburban neighborhoods. We dispose of all kinds of people in our line of work, that's true, but we obsess over the biggest polluters. The bodies of white, wealthy, copulating heterosexuals are efficiently repurposed, and the safety of the planet is maintained. Of course, another way to prevent babies from destroying the world would be to empower uterus havers. More and better education, leading to more and better career opportunities, independence, and autonomy for half of the world's population could have a huge effect on the size of families. Combine that with more and better sex education for all genders, plus access to birth control, and we could see responsible family planning happening all over the world. We can also work to reduce the cultural pressure to have children at all. We can say it's okay not to have kids. We can publicly thank the childless for their incredible service as first responders during a global emergency. We can pass laws making it mandatory for all wealthy white people to be spayed or neutered. The US often experiments with forcibly sterilizing poor and non-white people. Maybe it's time for someone else to have a turn. In any case, what does it take to survive a slasher film? The same thing it takes to survive global warming. But just in case the homicidal impulse to reproduce can't be diverted, just in case cultural norms prove supernaturally indestructible, just in case politicians can't resist getting into bed with fossil fuel companies, we'll be there, hiding in the shadows, in the unused rooms of your oversized house, watching and waiting. Thank you.